On the east side of Cleveland, Ohio, life moved at a pace that felt both familiar and suffocating. Marcus Bell, 41 years old, had grown used to routine. He worked the overnight shift as a security guard at a mid-range hotel off the interstate, a job that paid the bills but offered little else. Marcus wasn't the type to complain. He showed up early, greeted the guests who shuffled through the lobby at odd hours, and kept his head down. People who knew him described him as dependable, polite, and humble, a man who didn't demand more than what life had already given him. But behind that quiet exterior, Marcus carried a dream. He wanted a chance just once in his life to step outside of the grind, to pay off the debts, to maybe own something more than a second-hand car, to feel like the years of clocking in and clocking out meant more than just survival. At home, though, things were different. Marcus had been married to Sharon for nearly 15 years. She was 39, still youthful in appearance, sharp with her words, and restless in spirit. Sharon had a taste for things Marcus couldn't provide. Shopping sprees, weekend getaways, the newest phone upgrades, and dinners at places where the wine list cost more than Marcus's weekly paycheck. Their marriage had been tested over and over again by these differences. Marcus wanted simplicity. Sharon wanted extravagance. He dreamed of stability. She dreamed of escape. In public, they looked like an ordinary couple, arguing over groceries at Walmart, laughing at a barbecue with neighbors. But behind closed doors, the cracks in their relationship were deep and widening. Marcus had grown up in a working-class family where every dollar counted. His parents taught him to stretch paychecks, to save for emergencies, to think about tomorrow before spending today. Sharon, on the other hand, had been raised in a household where appearances mattered. Her mother worked as a hairdresser, her father a mechanic, and together they spoiled their only daughter with designer shoes bought on layaway and promises that she was destined for more than the small Cleveland neighborhood she grew up in. Sharon carried that expectation into adulthood, and when Marcus couldn't deliver the life she felt entitled to, resentment took root. Their friends noticed it, though few said anything out loud. At gatherings, Marcus often sat quietly at the edge of conversations, sipping a beer, while Sharon charmed everyone with her wit and energy. She loved attention, and she loved even more to point out what she lacked. A bigger house, a better car, a husband who could keep up. Sometimes she said it with a laugh, brushing Marcus's shoulder playfully, but the sting lingered. Marcus would smile, but his eyes betrayed the hurt. Those words stacked up like bricks over the years, building a wall of quiet shame between them. The arguments weren't explosive most of the time. They were quieter than that, simmering beneath the surface. Sarcastic remarks, icy silences, the kind of passive-aggressive exchanges that can poison a marriage even more effectively than shouting matches. Marcus tried to believe that things would even out, that Sharon's desire for more was just a phase, that if he kept working hard, she would eventually see the value in the life they had built. But Sharon's discontent only grew stronger with each passing year. To her, their home felt like a cage, their neighborhood a prison. She compared Marcus to men she saw online, flashy, wealthy, unburdened, and wondered why she was stuck with a man content to scrape by. Still, Marcus loved her. For all her sharp edges, Sharon had moments of softness, moments that reminded him of why he married her in the first place. Sometimes she curled up next to him on the couch, resting her head on his shoulder, and for a brief while the tension dissolved. In those rare moments, Marcus allowed himself to believe that maybe they would find their rhythm again. He clung to those scraps of tenderness, convinced that if he just held on long enough, things would get better. But beneath the surface, something darker was brewing. Marcus's dreams of a simple, secure life clashed violently with Sharon's hunger for more. The push and pull between them created a pressure neither could escape. For Marcus, The hope of breaking free from the grind was distant but alive, a flickering light he chased quietly in his mind. For Sharon, hope had transformed into bitterness, an ache that gnawed at her every time she saw someone else living the life she wanted. In Cleveland, ordinary couples lived ordinary struggles every day. But in the Bell household, those struggles were sharpening into something dangerous. The love that once held them together had thinned into a thread stretched too tight. All it would take was one spark, one twist of fate to snap it completely. Neither of them could have predicted how soon that spark would arrive or how violently it would tear their world apart. Marcus had always been the kind of man who bought lottery tickets with a mix of hope and resignation. It wasn't a habit, not really, more like a small rebellion against the monotony of his life. On nights when his shift ended early and he passed the corner gas station, he'd slide a few crumpled bills across the counter and walk out with a ticket or two. Most of the time, those slips of paper were nothing more than trash the next morning, tossed into the kitchen bin without a second thought. But every time he scratched the silver coating or checked the numbers on TV, there was a flicker of something inside him. What if? On a chilly Thursday in March, the what if became real. Marcus had worked a double shift and picked up a ticket on his way home. Just another long shot to distract him from his aching feet. He stuffed it in his jacket pocket and forgot about it until Sharon reminded him to clean out his laundry. The numbers matched. Not the kind of jackpot plaster across billboards, not millions, but enough to change everything. $89,600. To Marcus, it may as well have been $1 million. The moment he realized he'd won, he stood in the living room staring at the ticket as though it might burst into flames. His hands trembled. "Sharon," he called out, his voice breaking. She rushed in, eyes wide, expecting bad news. Instead, Marcus pressed the ticket into her hands. His face lit up with a smile she hadn't seen in years. "We did it," he said. "We finally caught a break." Sharon's lips parted, and for the first time in a long while, she threw her arms around him. They laughed, they shouted, they danced in the living room like teenagers. For Marcus, it was pure joy, proof that patience and faith had finally paid off. For Sharon, it was something else entirely. As she clutched that ticket, she wasn't thinking about savings or debt or cautious investments. She was thinking about new shoes, new furniture, trips to Las Vegas, maybe even a down payment on a condo, far away from the neighborhood she loathed. Marcus wasn't dreaming of freedom. He was doubling down on responsibility. "You're thinking too small," Sharon finally said, her voice sharp. "Small?" Marcus laughed softly. "Sharon, this is more money than I've ever seen in my life. We can finally be secure." "Secure?" she snapped. "Marcus, $89,000 is nothing if you just bury it in bills. We should enjoy it. Live a little. What's the point of money if all you do is hide it away?" Marcus's smile faltered. He tried to soften his tone, tried to remind her that they could still take a vacation, still splurge a little, but that most of it had to go toward their future. Sharon's jaw tightened. She had spent years watching her life drift by in the shadow of Marcus's caution, and now, when fortune had finally smiled on them, he wanted to smother it under the weight of what-ifs and somedays. They went to bed in silence, the ticket tucked safely in Marcus's wallet on the nightstand. He lay awake, heart full of plans, already imagining the relief of sending the final mortgage payment. Sharon lay beside him, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing in a different direction. In her eyes, the ticket was not just paper and ink. It was a ticket out, a ticket to the life she'd always wanted, the life she believed she deserved. The days that followed only deepened the divide. Marcus made calls to the bank, asked about certificates of deposit, even researched investment accounts. Sharon, meanwhile, daydreamed out loud about weekend trips to Chicago, a new wardrobe, maybe even a new car. The more Marcus spoke of savings, the more Sharon felt trapped. To her, his vision was no better than the life they already had, just with fewer bills. Their friends noticed the tension when the news of Marcus's win slipped out. At a neighbor's cookout, people congratulated him, clapped him on the back, teased him about finally being able to quit his job. Marcus smiled shyly, insisting he would keep working. Sharon, on the other hand, basked in the attention, joking about yachts and designer handbags. Behind the laughter, though, there was a sharp edge to her tone. Late one evening, Marcus came home from work to find Sharon scrolling through vacation packages online. Wade gently reminded her that the money hadn't even been deposited yet. She slammed the laptop shut. "You always ruin everything," she muttered, her voice dripping with disdain. Marcus said nothing, just hung his jacket and sat quietly, but the words cut deep. For Marcus, the lottery was a blessing, a chance to finally secure the modest life he had always hoped for. For Sharon, it was a curse, a reminder of all the things she could have if only she wasn't tethered to a man who thought too small. That single slip of paper, worth nearly $90,000, had opened a door. But for the Bells, it wasn't a door leading to freedom. It was a door leading to disaster. And once it swung open, there would be no turning back. Marcus had always been a man of quiet gestures. So when the check from the lottery finally cleared into their account, he didn't think about champagne in a fancy hotel suite or throwing a party to brag about their good fortune. Instead, he stopped at the grocery store on his way home from work, picking up a steak, a bottle of mid-shelf wine, and a small chocolate cake with congratulations scrawled in white icing. To Marcus, this was celebration enough. A simple meal, just him and Sharon, together in their home, acknowledging that, for once, the tide had turned in their favor. Sharon came downstairs that evening to find the table set. Candles flickered in holders Marcus had dug out from the back of the cupboard. The steak sizzled in a pan, filling the house with a smell that reminded her of better days, when small indulgences felt special. For a moment, Sharon softened. She smiled as Marcus clumsily tried to pour the wine without spilling, his face beaming with a boyish pride she hadn't seen in years. "Look at you," she teased, slipping into her chair, "like some five-star chef." Marcus laughed. "Only the best for us tonight. We got reason to celebrate." They clinked glasses, and for the first half hour, the night was almost perfect. Marcus talked about how he could finally replace the bald tires on the car, maybe even fix the leaky roof before winter. Sharon listened, nodding, sipping her wine faster than he noticed. She laughed at his jokes, reached across the table to squeeze his hand, even kissed his cheek as he served her a slice of cake. Marcus let himself believe, just for that short time, that the money had healed the cracks in their marriage. But as the night wore on and the second bottle of wine was opened, the fragile peace began to fray. Marcus, a little flushed from drinking, grew sentimental. He talked about how proud he was that they'd made it this far together, how he couldn't wait to plan out their future. "I've already talked to the bank," he said, his voice earnest. "If we put a good chunk into a CD, we'll get steady interest. That way, even if something happens, you'll always be taken care of. We won't have to worry anymore." Sharon's smile froze. She swirled the wine in her glass, staring at the crimson liquid. "So that's it? Lock it away in some bank account." Marcus blinked, confused by her tone. "Well, yeah, that's the smart thing to do. We can still enjoy some of it, but we have to think long-term, Sharon." Her eyes narrowed. "Long-term? Marcus, I've been living in long-term misery for 15 years. Don't you get it? This is our chance to finally live, to finally breathe. And you're already talking about hiding it away like it's another bill to pay." Marcus set down his fork, his appetite gone. "It's not about hiding it. It's about protecting us. You've seen what happens when people blow through their winnings. They end up worse off than before. I don't want that for us." The tension hung heavy in the air. Sharon drained her glass, the warmth of the wine fueling her irritation. She thought about the catalog she'd flipped through earlier that week, the vacation packages she'd bookmarked online, the endless list of things she wanted but never had. She pictured Marcus shoving all that possibility into some sterile account, condemning her to more years of scraping by under his version of safety. "You always do this," she hissed. "You take something good and strangle it until there's nothing left. You're too afraid to live, Marcus. And now you want to drag me down with you." Marcus's face fell. He reached for her hand, but she pulled it back. "Sharon, please. I just want us to be okay. This money could finally give us peace." But Sharon wasn't hearing him anymore. In her mind, Marcus had become the enemy of her freedom. The wine dulled her restraint, letting long-buried bitterness bubble to the surface. She pictured a different life, one where she could spend freely, move freely, answer to no one. The money, she realized, was the key, and Marcus was standing in her way. Later, after the dishes were cleared and Marcus had stumbled to the couch, drowsy from drink, Sharon stood in the doorway of the kitchen and watched him. His head tilted back, mouth slightly open, the sound of his snores filling the quiet house. To anyone else, he would have looked harmless, almost sweet. But to Sharon, in that moment, he looked like an obstacle, an anchor tied to her ankle. She poured herself one last glass of wine, staring at the faint reflection of herself in the kitchen window. The thought came sharp and sudden, shocking even to her. But once it appeared, it lingered. What if Marcus wasn't here to control the money? What if it was just hers? She shook her head, trying to brush it off, but the idea had already planted itself, deep and poisonous. She whispered to herself, "This could all be mine." The night that began with laughter and clinking glasses ended in silence, broken only by the steady hum of the refrigerator and the darker hum building inside Sharon's mind. For Marcus, the celebration had been a moment of joy, a promise of a safer tomorrow. For Sharon, it became the spark of something far more dangerous, a spark that would soon ignite into a fire she could never put out. Marcus never saw it coming. The morning after their little celebration, he woke with a dull headache and the kind of sluggishness that comes from too much wine. Sharon was already up, moving through the kitchen with unusual energy. She set down a plate of eggs and bacon, her smile practiced, her voice warm in a way Marcus hadn't felt in months. "You deserve this, baby," she said, placing the plate in front of him. "You've worked hard. You've carried us all these years. Let me take care of you today." Marcus chuckled, touched by the gesture. He didn't notice how closely Sharon watched him as he ate, or how her hand lingered just a moment too long on the wine glass she refilled, insisting he have just one more, to loosen up. By early evening, Marcus was swaying, his words slurring. His guard was down, and Sharon knew it. "Why don't we go downstairs?" she suggested sweetly. "How about another bottle waiting? We can toast again, just the two of us." Marcus, ever eager to please, nodded and followed her into the dimly lit garage. The air smelled faintly of oil and concrete. He stumbled toward the old fridge in the corner, reaching for the handle. That was when Sharon gripped the hammer she'd tucked into her sweater pocket earlier. The weight of it felt strange, almost electric in her hand. For a fleeting second, she hesitated. 15 years of marriage flashed through her mind. Holidays spent together, inside jokes, the man who had once held her when she cried. But then she pictured the bank account, pictured the car she could drive, the vacation she could take, the life she could live without him holding her back. The hesitation evaporated. Marcus bent down, squinting to see inside the fridge. "Which bottle you talking about, hon?" That was when the hammer came down. The sound was sickening, a sharp crack that echoed in the small garage. Marcus staggered, confusion etched across his face as blood streamed from the gash above his temple. He turned, eyes wide, trying to form her name, but another blow silenced him. His legs buckled. Sharon, breathing hard, swung again and again, until Marcus collapsed in a heap on the concrete. For a moment, the only sound was her ragged breathing. Her hands trembled violently as she stared at the crimson splatter on the floor. Marcus lay still, his chest unmoving, his once gentle eyes vacant. The reality of what she had done hit her in waves. But instead of breaking down, Sharon forced herself into action. She dragged his body away from the fridge, struggling under his weight, and propped him awkwardly near the bottom of the steps. She tossed the hammer into a trash bag, pulled off her gloves, and shoved them inside. Sweat ran down her temples as she rehearsed the story in her head. Marcus had been drinking. He'd come down to grab another bottle, and he'd fallen. Head injury. Tragic accident. Sharon rushed upstairs, dialing 911 with a voice she made sure to break into sobs. "My husband," she cried breathlessly. He fell in the garage. There's blood everywhere. Please, send someone, please." The dispatcher's calm tone guided her through the motions until sirens wailed in the distance. Sharon glanced down at herself, noticing a faint smear of blood on her wrist. She scrubbed it under the sink, heart pounding, whispering to herself that everything would be fine, that no one would question a grieving wife. When the paramedics arrived, Sharon played her role perfectly. She clutched her chest, rocked back and forth, begged them to save him though she knew it was far too late. The police followed soon after, and Sharon spun her tale. Marcus had been drinking heavily. He lost his balance, and he must have struck his head on the cement. She spoke quickly, eyes brimming with tears she forced out, her voice trembling just enough to seem believable. But even as she spoke, cracks appeared in her performance. One officer's gaze lingered on the blood spatter pattern on the wall, too high for a simple fall. Another noted the odd angle of Marcus's body, as if he'd been moved. Sharon noticed their eyes, the way they exchanged glances, and her stomach twisted. That night, when the house was finally quiet again and Marcus's body had been taken away, Sharon stepped into the bathroom and stared at her reflection. Her hair was wild, her makeup smudged, her eyes hollow. She whispered to herself, "It's mine now. It's finally mine." But even as the words left her lips, the faint hum of doubt returned. She thought of the neighbors' security cameras pointing toward their driveway, of the trash bag she had hurriedly dumped, of the questions she hadn't prepared for. She shook her head, pushing the fears aside. The money was worth it, she told herself. Freedom was worth it. Sharon crawled into bed alone, pulling Marcus's pillow close, breathing in the faint scent of him. It was the last night she would ever sleep in that bed as a free woman, though she couldn't know it yet. For now, she told herself the lie she needed to believe, that she had gotten away with it. The flashing red and blue lights painted the Bell residence in harsh, pulsing colors. Neighbors gathered at the end of the driveway, whispering to one another, their faces pale in the cold Cleveland night. Sharon stood just outside the garage, her robe cinched tightly around her, arms wrapped across her chest as though to keep from unraveling. She sobbed when the stretcher rolled out, Marcus's body hidden under a white sheet, but her eyes darted constantly toward the detectives who had arrived on scene. Detective Alan Mercer, a seasoned investigator with 20 years in homicide, crouched by the dark smear of blood near the base of the steps. He tilted his head, studying the angle. If he fell, Mercer muttered, almost to himself, "This doesn't track." The splatter was too high, the pattern too direct, like something from a blunt force strike, rather than an accidental tumble. Paramedics had done their best, but Marcus was gone before they even arrived. Sharon clutched her chest as Mercer approached her. She played the role convincingly. Distraught widow, shaking hands, voice breaking with grief. "He'd been drinking," she whispered, her voice raspy. "We were celebrating the lottery win. He just wanted another bottle from the fridge. I heard a thud, and when I came down, he was just lying there." Mercer nodded politely, jotting notes, but his eyes never left hers. There was something in Sharon's performance that rang a little too polished, like an actress repeating lines she'd rehearsed in the mirror. Inside the garage, crime scene techs worked methodically. They noted the faint drag marks near Marcus's body position, as if he had been shifted after the fall. One technician lifted a flashlight toward the wall, high spatter, radiating outward. That detail alone made Mercer's gut tighten. Sharon tried to keep busy, offering officers coffee, asking over and over if she should call Marcus's family, wringing her hands for emphasis. But as the night wore on, the mask began to crack. She snapped when Mercer gently asked if she and Marcus had argued that night. "No, we were happy. Happier than ever," she blurted, her pitch just a little too high. By the next morning, suspicion was already settling over the investigation. Mercer requested surveillance footage from nearby homes. One neighbor across the street had cameras that covered the Bell driveway. When a detective reviewed the tape, his eyebrows furrowed. The timestamp was just after midnight. The grainy footage showed Sharon struggling with a large black trash bag, dragging it toward the curb. The bag sagged heavily at the bottom. She paused, glancing nervously around before tossing it into the can. Mercer knew better than to jump to conclusions, but his instincts rarely failed him. "Get that bag," he told an officer. Hours later, it was recovered. Inside, a pair of yellow cleaning gloves speckled with blood and a hammer streaked dark red. Meanwhile, at the hospital, the coroner conducted a preliminary exam. The report came back swiftly. Marcus's injuries were inconsistent with a fall. The fractures were sharp, concentrated, and repetitive. Blunt force trauma, the coroner said flatly. At least 3 blows. This wasn't an accident. When Mercer delivered the news to Sharon, she clutched the edge of the kitchen counter as if she might collapse. "That's impossible," she insisted, her voice trembling. "He must have hit his head more than once when he fell." But the detective noted the way her hand shot to her throat, how her eyes refused to meet his. Then came the bank report. Less than 4 hours after Marcus's official time of death, Sharon had logged into their joint account and attempted to transfer the entire lottery, some into an account under her sole name. The transaction had been flagged and frozen due to the unusual activity. For Mercer, it was the final piece of a puzzle that was falling neatly into place. The community was stunned. News of Marcus's win had already spread. He was the lucky man who beat the odds, a working-class security guard who finally caught a break. Now, the story darkened. His sudden, violent death and whispers that his wife had something to do with it. Neighbors who had once chatted with Sharon at the mailbox now avoided her gaze, muttering that she'd never seemed satisfied with what she had. In the days following the murder, Mercer and his team pressed harder. They subpoenaed Sharon's phone records and found texts to a close friend the week before Marcus's death. In one, she complained bitterly, "He's already talking about hiding the money. I swear, Marcus wants to trap me in this miserable life forever." In another, "If I had that cash to myself, I'd be gone tomorrow." Confronted with the evidence, Sharon's composure cracked. In the interview room at the station, under the buzz of fluorescent lights, she crossed her arms, her jaw tight, offering clipped, defensive answers. Mercer leaned across the table, his voice low and steady. "Sharon, we've got the hammer. We've got the gloves. We got you on camera disposing of them. And we've got the bank trying to move the money. Help me understand. Did you really think no one would notice?" Sharon's eyes filled with tears, but these weren't the practiced sobs she had shown before. They were angrier, hotter, born of panic. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," she whispered. "He never wanted me to have anything. He never wanted me to live." Mercer sat back, the confession, not full, but damning, hanging between them. He knew the case was no longer about proving what happened. It was about bringing it all into the light. The investigation had started with a 911 call about a fall in the garage. But now, the picture was clear. Marcus Bell hadn't tripped. He hadn't slipped. He had been beaten to death by the one person he trusted most, for the sake of money that should have been their shared salvation. And soon, Sharon Bell would face the weight of justice closing in. By the time Sharon returned home after her first round of questioning, the fragile story she had built was already beginning to collapse. She tried to hold her head high when she walked through the front door, but every corner of the house seemed to whisper back at her. The garage smelled faintly of bleach. The steps where Marcus had supposedly fallen still bore faint stains no amount of scrubbing could erase. Even in the quiet, Sharon felt watched by the detectives, by the neighbors, by the very walls of her own home. Detective Mercer wasn't the kind of man to rush. He preferred to let lies rot from the inside until they caved in on themselves. Over the next week, he methodically poked holes in Sharon's account. The timeline didn't fit. The severity of Marcus's head injuries couldn't be explained away by a single tumble. And that bag, the one caught on camera, contained damning evidence she couldn't explain. When Sharon was called back for a second interview, she doubled down on her story. Her eyes filled with tears, her voice cracked as she insisted she had simply panicked after finding Marcus. "I threw away the gloves because I didn't want to see them," she said, twisting her hands. "I wasn't thinking straight." Mercer studied her carefully. He had seen this before. Suspects clinging to flimsy excuses as if they could will the truth into disappearing. "And the hammer?" he asked. "Why throw that away if it wasn't used?" Sharon faltered. Her lips parted, but no words came. The silence stretched, heavy and condemning. Mercer didn't press further. He didn't have to. Every hesitation, every misplaced sob was another crack in the facade. The financial trail spoke louder than Sharon's tears ever could. Investigators uncovered records showing that within hours of Marcus's death, she had attempted to transfer nearly the entire $89,600 lottery win into her own account. The bank flagged it as suspicious. When confronted with this, Sharon snapped, her composure slipping entirely. "Of course I tried to move it. It was my money too," she shouted in the interrogation room. "You think I was going to let them freeze it? You think I was going to let his family take it from me?" The words hung in the air like smoke, damning in their rawness. Mercer leaned back, his expression unreadable. "So you admit," he said slowly, "that you were more worried about the money than about your husband's death." Sharon's face flushed. She tried to backtrack, claiming she had been in shock, that she wasn't thinking clearly. But the damage was done. To Mercer, to the recording camera in the corner of the room, to the jury that would one day watch her tantrum, it was as good as a confession. Friends and neighbors began to speak up as well. One close friend of Sharon's turned over text messages that painted her in a chilling light. "If Marcus doesn't loosen up with this money, I swear I'll lose my mind," one message read. Another, "This is my ticket out. I won't let him lock it away like everything else." The jury of public opinion was already forming, and it wasn't on Sharon's side. Meanwhile, forensic analysis came back on the hammer. Marcus's blood was found embedded in tiny crevices of the metal head. On the handle, Sharon's fingerprints, smudged but undeniable. The gloves from the trash bag told the same story. Mercer knew what all of this meant. Sharon wasn't just lying. She was drowning in her lies, clawing for a way to breathe while the truth pulled her under. When he returned for one final round of questioning, he laid out the evidence on the table one by one. The surveillance footage, the bank transfer attempt, the text messages, the forensic results. "You want to keep telling me this was an accident?" Mercer asked quietly. "You want to tell me again how he just fell? Because every single piece of evidence says otherwise. And you know it." Sharon's shoulders slumped. For the first time, her tears looked real, not manipulative, not rehearsed, but raw. She pressed her palms against her eyes, shaking her head. "I didn't mean to," she whispered. I couldn't stand him telling me what to do anymore. He wanted to bury that money, like he buried me all these years. It wasn't a full confession, not yet, but it was enough. Enough for Mercer to know the mask had finally slipped. Enough for the prosecutor to start building a case that would leave no room for doubt. The woman who once dreamed of freedom and luxury was now ensnared in her own lies, each crack widening until the entire alibi shattered. Sharon had set out to claim a fortune for herself. Instead, she was left with nothing but blood on her hands and the inevitable weight of justice closing in. The morning of Sharon Bell's arrest broke gray and cold over Cleveland. Detective Mercer had been up since before dawn, sipping bitter coffee at his desk while reviewing the case file one last time. The evidence was airtight: surveillance footage, financial records, the forensic reports, the texts. Still, there was always a weight to these moments. An arrest wasn't just the end of an investigation. It was the beginning of the justice system grinding forward with all its unpredictability. At 7:45 a.m., 2 squad cars pulled into the Bell's driveway. Sharon was at the kitchen table, scrolling on her phone, when a knock rattled the door. She froze, her heart plummeting. When she opened it, Mercer stood there, his badge glinting in the dull morning light. "Sharon Bell," he said evenly, "you're under arrest for the murder of your husband, Marcus Bell." Her jaw dropped. No, you don't understand." Her protests were drowned out by the metallic snap of handcuffs closing around her wrists. Neighbors peeked through curtains as Sharon was led out, her robe flapping in the wind, her face twisted with disbelief and rage. The woman who once craved status now became a spectacle of shame. The trial that followed was one of the most closely watched cases in the city in years. The press latched onto every sordid detail: the modest lottery win, the greedy wife, the loyal husband struck down for daring to think small. Headlines screamed across Ohio papers: "Lottery luck turns deadly. Wife kills husband over $89,600 jackpot." In the courtroom, Sharon appeared transformed. Dressed in a pale blue blouse and conservative skirt chosen by her defense team. Her hair neatly styled, she tried to project the image of a grieving widow wrongfully accused. She dabbed her eyes with tissues, whispered to her lawyer, cast pitiful glances toward the jury. But across the aisle sat the prosecution, armed with a mountain of evidence. Assistant District Attorney Melissa Kravitz was relentless, her voice sharp as steel. From the opening statement, she painted Sharon not as a grieving wife, but as a calculating predator. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Kravitz began, pacing before them, "this case is about greed. Not millions, not a fortune that could last lifetimes. Just under $90,000. That is the price Marcus Bell's life was worth to the woman he trusted most. He thought they were celebrating their future together. She was planning his death." The prosecution called witness after witness. Neighbors testified about the arguments they'd overheard, Sharon's constant complaints about money, her visible dissatisfaction with Marcus's modest lifestyle. One neighbor described seeing her dragging that black trash bag to the curb, captured on video for all to see. The coroner took the stand, explaining in clinical detail how Marcus's injuries could not have come from a fall. These were deliberate blows, consistent with repeated strikes from a blunt object, he told the jury. Photographs of Marcus's wounds were displayed, and jurors shifted uncomfortably in their seats. A forensic expert confirmed Sharon's fingerprints on the hammer, her DNA inside the gloves. The bank officer testified about her attempt to move the funds mere hours after Marcus's death. Finally, Sharon's own text messages were read aloud. The words echoed through the courtroom. "If I had that cash to myself, I'd be gone tomorrow." The defense, led by attorney William Pratt, fought back desperately. He painted Sharon as a woman trapped in a controlling marriage, a wife worn down by years of financial stress. He suggested that Marcus's drinking the night of his death may have played a role, that perhaps Sharon had panicked after a tragic accident and tried to cover up poorly. "This is not the story of a murderer," Pratt told the jury. "This is the story of a woman who made mistakes in the aftermath of grief. She was scared, she was confused, and yes, she was worried about money. But that doesn't make her a killer." At one point, Sharon herself took the stand. She clutched a tissue in trembling hands, her voice quivering as she spoke. "Marcus was my husband," she said, tears streaking her cheeks. "I loved him. We argued, sure, like any couple, but I never wanted him gone. That night, it all happened so fast. I didn't know what to do. I just panicked." But under cross-examination, ADA Kravitz dismantled her performance piece by piece. "You say you panicked," Kravitz pressed, "yet you had the presence of mind to dispose of the hammer, the gloves, to call 911 with a story rehearsed enough to sound convincing, and to attempt to transfer nearly $90,000 into your personal account. Is that panic, Mrs. Bell? Or is that premeditation?" Sharon's lips trembled, but she had no answer. The silence in the courtroom was deafening. Suddenly, Sharon's composure shattered. She broke into loud sobs, clutching at her lawyer's arm, her voice rising in a desperate wail. Some jurors shifted uncomfortably as she cried out, "Please, you don't understand." Her eyes darted toward Marcus's family. For a fleeting second, she locked eyes with Denise, his sister, who stared back through a veil of tears before shaking her head slowly, a look of sorrow and contempt that made the courtroom even heavier. For 2 weeks, the trial gripped Cleveland. Every night, local news replayed highlights. Sharon's sobs on the stand, the forensic diagrams, the neighbor's testimony. To the public, she became the face of cold-blooded greed, a woman willing to destroy her husband for less than 6 figures. Marcus's family filled the gallery daily, their grief palpable. His sister, Denise, wept quietly through testimony, clutching a framed photo of Marcus in his security uniform. To them, the trial wasn't just about evidence. It was about reclaiming Marcus's dignity, showing that his life had been worth far more than Sharon had valued it. When closing arguments arrived, Kravitz's words landed like a hammer blow. Marcus Bell believed he had finally caught a break. He thought he had found hope for his future. Instead, he found betrayal in his own home at the hands of his wife. Do not let Sharon Bell buy her freedom with tears. Give Marcus the justice he deserves. The defense's closing was softer, appealing to sympathy, suggesting doubt in the chain of evidence, urging the jury not to destroy another life. But by then, the tide had turned. The jury deliberated for less than 6 hours. When the verdict was read, Sharon stood, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Sharon Bell, guilty of murder in the first degree." The courtroom gasped. Sharon's knees buckled. She collapsed in her chair, shaking her head violently, whispering, "No, no, no." Her whispers turned into a piercing cry. "It's not fair. I loved him," she screamed, her voice echoing off the marble walls. Gasps rippled through the gallery, but Marcus's family did not move. Denise held her brother's photo tight against her chest, her face streaked with tears, yet her gaze was steady, cold, unflinching, as Sharon's outburst faded into sobs. That stark contrast, one woman clinging to grief, the other consumed by her downfall, hung in the air as the judge prepared to deliver the final sentence. Marcus's family embraced, tears streaming down their faces. Ada Kravitz closed her eyes, relief etched across her features. The judge banged his gavel, restoring order. Sharon Bell was no longer a wife, no longer the would-be beneficiary of a lottery miracle. She was now a convicted killer, her fate sealed. The courtroom was silent except for the sound of muffled sobs when the foreman finished reading the verdict. Guilty of murder in the first degree. Sharon Bell sat frozen, her mouth slightly open as if she couldn't quite process the words. Just a few weeks earlier, she had been bragging to friends about how her life was finally about to change for the better. Now, shackles of a different kind awaited her, those forged by the justice system, not by Marcus's cautious budgeting. Judge Helen Travers, a stern woman with a reputation for fairness, looked down at Sharon with little expression. "Mrs. Bell," she said, her voice steady, "your husband's life was worth far more than any amount of money. What you took from him cannot be replaced. What you attempted to gain, you have lost. For the crime of murder in the first degree, this court sentences you to life in prison without the possibility of parole." The gavel struck once, sharp and final. Sharon's head dropped into her hands. For the first time during the entire trial, the mask slipped completely. The tears that came now were not calculated, not rehearsed. They were tears of a woman staring down the reality of dying behind bars. Marcus's family clutched one another in the gallery, their grief mingled with relief. His sister Denise whispered through sobs, "He finally has justice." The weight that had pressed on them since that horrific night in the garage was lifted, even if the loss itself would never heal. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed, cameras flashing, microphones thrust forward. The lottery murder, they called it. Some framed it as a cautionary tale of greed, others as a tragedy of a man who had spent his whole life working hard only to have his dream snatched away by the person he trusted most. In the weeks that followed, the city of Cleveland couldn't stop talking about it. At diners and barber shops, in offices and schools, people debated Sharon's motives. It was just 89 grand, some said in disbelief. She threw her life away for less than $100,000. Others shook their heads and muttered, "Doesn't matter the amount. Greed blinds people. Always has, always will." The Ohio Lottery Commission announced that the money Marcus had won would be forfeited to the state and redirected into education funding. For many, that detail twisted the knife even deeper. Not only had Marcus lost his life, but the dream he carried, that maybe this money could give him and Sharon a fresh start, had dissolved into nothing. Back in the neighborhood, the Bell home stood as a grim reminder. The garage door where Marcus had taken his last breath remained locked, the house eventually placed on the market. Neighbors avoided walking too close, whispering about how Sharon had once smiled at them over the fence, talking about sales at the mall or her next hair appointment, all while harboring resentment strong enough to kill. For Marcus's coworkers at the hotel, the loss was personal. He had been the kind of man who remembered birthdays, who volunteered to cover shifts, who quietly slipped extra cash to the janitor struggling with bills. A memorial was held in the hotel lobby, attended by staff and regular guests alike. A framed photograph of Marcus in his security uniform stood beside a bouquet of white lilies. Beneath it, someone had placed a handwritten note, "A good man who deserved better." Sharon, meanwhile, was processed into the Ohio Reformatory for Women. Gone were the neatly pressed blouses and courtroom theatrics. In their place was an orange jumpsuit, a number stitched across her chest, and the stark reality of prison life. In her first weeks, she was kept under close watch. Her notoriety made her a target for both ridicule and contempt among fellow inmates. Lottery Lady, some called her, mocking the foolishness of killing for less than 90 grand. In interviews years later, prison staff would remark how Sharon adjusted poorly at first. She wept in her cell at night, clung to the hope of appeal, and often muttered bitterly that Marcus never let her live. But the appeals went nowhere. The evidence was too overwhelming, the confession too clear. Sharon's story was finished long before the ink on her sentencing papers dried. For Marcus's family, the aftermath was quieter but no less painful. His mother, too frail to attend the trial, placed a photo of her son on the mantel beside a flickering candle. Every Sunday, Denise visited his grave, placing fresh flowers and whispering updates about the nieces and nephews he would never see grow up. In the end, Marcus became more than just a name in a case file. His story turned into a parable told on local news specials and true crime podcasts alike. The man who finally caught a break, only to have it stolen by the one person meant to share it with him. It reminded everyone that money, no matter how small or large the amount, could twist love into something monstrous. The tragedy of Marcus Bell was not just that he died, but how he died, on the cusp of the happiness he had worked his whole life to earn. And the tragedy of Sharon Bell was not just that she killed him, but that in doing so, she destroyed the very future she thought she was seizing. Sharon Bell's name slowly faded from the headlines, but the story lingered in the city's collective memory like a scar. Months after the trial, Cleveland residents still spoke of it in hushed tones, shaking their heads at the senselessness of it all. A lottery win should have been a moment of joy, a chance for a hardworking man to ease the burden of life's grind. Instead, it became the spark that revealed the ugliest parts of human nature. In prison, Sharon found herself living a version of a life she had once mocked Marcus for accepting. Monotony, restraint, a future stripped of luxury. The orange jumpsuit she wore daily became her new identity, a uniform that erased any illusion of individuality. Other inmates sneered when they passed her in the yard. The Lottery Lady, they called her, spitting the words with derision. To them, she wasn't a tragic figure. She was pathetic, the woman who threw everything away for pocket change. The irony wasn't lost on Sharon. She had spent years accusing Marcus of thinking too small, of burying their lives in bills. And yet, she had killed him for less than $90,000, a sum that dwindled into nothing once it passed through the legal system. The money never belonged to her, never bought her the freedom she craved. Instead, it was seized and redirected, invested not in designer shoes or vacation packages, but in school programs across Ohio. Somewhere, children would benefit from the very prize she killed for. That thought haunted her more than the sentence itself. At night, in her narrow bunk, Sharon replayed the final moments in the garage. The sound of the hammer striking bone. The way Marcus had turned, confused, betrayed, his lips forming her name before the last blow silenced him forever. She had thought the memory would fade, dulled by time and distance. It didn't. It grew sharper with every passing day, an unrelenting reminder of the man she had once promised to love and protect. Marcus's family carried their grief differently. Denise continued to visit his grave every Sunday, the flowers she left always bright, as if she were determined to replace the darkness of his death with color. On the headstone were etched the words, "A simple man with simple dreams, taken too soon. Neighbors often paused by the grave when they passed through the cemetery, some whispering prayers, others simply shaking their heads at the thought of how easily a life could be stolen. The hotel where Marcus had worked set up a small memorial in the staff break room. His photo in uniform, smiling gently, hung beside a plaque that read, "In honor of a man who kept watch so others could rest." For the employees who had known him, Marcus became a symbol of quiet integrity, proof that decency still mattered, even in a world that too often rewarded selfishness. As the years passed, the Bell case made its way into documentaries and late-night true crime specials. In 2022, a popular true crime podcast devoted an entire season to the lottery murder, interviewing neighbors, detectives, and even reading excerpts from Sharon's prison journal. The series shot to the top of Apple's crime charts, drawing millions of listeners nationwide and proving the story still haunted the public imagination. Journalists and podcasters dissected it endlessly, how a relatively modest lottery could unravel a marriage, how greed could warp love into violence. Some saw Sharon as a cautionary tale about entitlement. Others saw Marcus as a tragic reminder that kindness and restraint are not always enough to protect you from the cruelty of those closest to you. But for those who lived through it, the lesson was more personal. Friends of Marcus, neighbors, even distant acquaintances often found themselves pausing to appreciate what they had: a steady paycheck, a warm home, a partner who stood beside them without resentment. The Bell story became a quiet warning that echoed beyond its headlines. Money can reveal the truth about people, and sometimes that truth is far darker than we want to believe. In her prison journal, never published but discovered years later by an inmate who befriended her, Sharon wrote a line that summed up her dissent. "I thought money would free me, but it chained me to my worst self." Marcus saw it coming. I just refused to listen. By then, it was too late. Marcus's story ended in a garage, his dreams shattered with a hammer's blow. Sharon's story ended in a cell, her freedom exchanged for the fleeting fantasy of wealth. And for everyone who heard of their tale, the lesson remained carved in blood, that the pursuit of money without love, gratitude, or humility doesn't lead to freedom at all. It leads only to ruin.